In 1963, a weapons manufacturer built a suit of armor to survive a war. By 2008, that same idea launched the biggest movie franchise in history. This is the story of how a Cold War propaganda hero became the face of modern pop culture. Iron Man's rise from the comic page to the silver screen. If you're new here, this channel breaks down the origins and evolution of pop culture's biggest icons. Today we're covering two timelines at once. The comic book Iron Man, born in the pages of Marvel in the 60s, and the cinematic Iron Man, who didn't just start a franchise, he started an entire genre of filmmaking. Let's get into it. Iron Man first appeared in Tales of Suspense issue 39, cover dated March 1963. He was created by Stan Lee, with the story fleshed out by Larry Lieber, and designs from Don Heck and Jack Kirby. The idea, as Lee described it later, was a deliberate challenge. Tony Stark starts the story captured in Southeast Asia, gravely wounded, forced to build a suit of armor just to keep his own heart beating and escape captivity. The shrapnel in the chest plate keeping him alive. That detail became the emotional core of the character for the next 6 decades. Through the 60s and 70s, the armor evolved constantly, from the bulky gray prototype to the sleek red and gold design most fans recognize today, introduced not long after his debut. But the comics didn't just update his look, they updated what the character meant. The landmark arc came in 1979 with Demon in a Bottle, written by David Michelinie and Bob Layton. For the first time, a mainstream superhero's greatest enemy wasn't a supervillain, it was alcoholism. Tony Stark's struggle with addiction became one of the most respected character arcs in superhero history, proving Iron Man could carry real, grounded stakes. The late 80s brought Armor Wars, where Stark goes to war against anyone who stole or copied his technology, a storyline that doubled as commentary on weapons proliferation. Then in the 2000s, Extremis by Warren Ellis reinvented Stark's armor as something biologically integrated into his body, modernizing the character for a more tech-driven age. And then came Civil War in 2006, the storyline that repositioned Tony Stark as a divisive, morally complicated figure, willing to clash with his fellow heroes over a registration act for superpowered individuals. This version of Stark, flawed, controlling, convinced he's right, became the blueprint for the character Hollywood would eventually adapt. By the mid-2000s, Iron Man wasn't just a B-list Avenger anymore. He was one of Marvel's most complex characters. The only problem? Almost nobody outside comic shops knew it yet. In 2008, Marvel Studios was not the powerhouse it is today. It was a struggling company that had to mortgage its own characters just to finance a movie. And the character they bet everything on wasn't Spider-Man or the X-Men. It was Iron Man, a hero most casual moviegoers had never heard of. Director Jon Favreau made a decision that defined the film's tone. Instead of leaning on jokes about evil corporations, he leaned into Tony Stark as a flawed, charming genius. And for that role, he fought for an actor the studio was nervous about. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't the obvious choice. He had a well-documented history of personal struggles, and insurance companies were hesitant to back him. But Favreau and producer Kevin Feige pushed for him anyway, betting that Downey's real-life comeback story would mirror Tony Stark's own redemption arc. It's one of the most famous casting gambles in film history, and it paid off completely. When Iron Man hit theaters, it didn't just succeed, it redefined what a superhero movie could be. It was witty, grounded, and treated its hero's flaws as the point, not an obstacle. And then came the scene that changed Hollywood forever. In the film's post-credits scene, Nick Fury shows up to tell Tony Stark he's not the only superhero in the world. It was a small moment, but it was the first domino in what would become the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a connected franchise model now copied by nearly every major studio. From there, the buildup was relentless. Iron Man 2 expanded the world. The Avengers in 2012 proved a shared universe could work at a massive scale, with Stark front and center as the team's de facto leader and financier. Iron Man 3 explored PTSD after the events of the Avengers. Age of Ultron tied his fear of failure directly to the creation of the film's villain. Civil War, adapted loosely from the comic arc, finally let the franchise dig into Stark's control issues and guilt. And then in 2019, Avengers Endgame gave the character his ending, a sacrifice framed as the final cost of over a decade of guilt, responsibility, and growth. It wasn't just the end of a character arc, it was the emotional closing chapter of an entire cinematic era. By the time the dust settled, Iron Man had anchored a franchise worth billions, launched the most successful film series in history, and turned Robert Downey Jr. into one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. So which version is the real Iron Man? Honestly, both. The comics gave the character 6 decades of depth: addiction, war, paranoia, technological ambition, and moral conflict. The movies took that emotional foundation and compressed it into a single, focused arc. Guilt over war profiteering, leading to redemption, leading to sacrifice. Even visually, the films pulled directly from comic history. The Mark I armor echoes the rough, improvised look of his earliest comic suit. The clean red and gold movie design mirrors the classic look comic fans had loved since the 60s. The films didn't reinvent Iron Man, they translated him. From a wounded weapons manufacturer in a Vietnam-era comic, to the genius billionaire who kicked off the biggest cinematic universe ever made, Iron Man's rise wasn't an accident. It was built one storyline, one casting decision, and one risk at a time. And honestly, that's a pretty fitting story for a hero whose whole identity is about building something better out of what almost killed him. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments which Iron Man storyline you'd want covered next. Armor Wars, Extremis, or the Civil War comic in full detail.